This is the final session of Day 2, the Innovation, Investment and Economy stage here at CogX, I beg your pardon. It gives me great pleasure to welcome to the stage for the final session to discuss Icebreaker 1, addressing the multi-trillion risk and opportunity of the climate crisis, Gavin Starks, the founder of Dgen, and Baroness Bryony Worthington of the Environmental Defence Fund Europe.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and thank you for showing up at the late hour of this session. My name is Gavin Starks. I'm the founder of Dgen, and I just want to run through a quick introduction. Then Bryony and I are going to have a bit of a Q&A session to walk through some of the project. So Icebreaker 1 is a new non-profit that we're just in the process of setting up, specifically looking at the climate crisis that we're facing, and we're declaring a data emergency, and Icebreaker 1 as the emergency response to the data emergency. I'm going to talk through a little bit about what that means, but just to begin with, I think at CogX, we believe that we are the modern age, and every age thinks that it's the modern age, especially this one. And I really want to bring us back to some home truths about how much we've actually seen of technology applied in the field today that's really helping improve people's lives. When we talk about climate change, it's not just climate change that's at stake. We're looking at trillions of dollars of investment. The global value at risk ranges from the single digit to the double digit trillions. The Bank of England has just come out and said they've got a $20 trillion liability sitting on their balance sheets. And we expect this to increase in costs to our economy if we don't do anything about it. We've had, excuse me, the Bank of England, as I mentioned, 20 trillion potential loss on liability on their balance sheet, and a climate Minsky moment where we actually see some negative feedback loops kicking into the economy and making things systemically worse. And by worse, we mean things like this. So PG&E, one of the biggest energy firms in the US, declaring bankruptcy because of the fires. We would expect to see more events like this affecting our businesses over time. And why? Well, we've got 10 years left to stop overspending on our emissions budgets. When you think about the emissions we're allowed to emit, or we should be able to emit over the next decade, and our current spend rates, to avoid hitting 1.5 degrees of warming, we've got to really start thinking seriously about what we're going to do. We've also got species collapse, at least 1 million species at risk of collapse, which is catastrophic for the food supply chain. So if you think this doesn't affect everybody, what this will precipitate will be the destruction of significant parts of our supply chain on our food. And we have wildly skewed the biodiversity here, so that 60% of our mammals on Earth are livestock. We've got 96% of all mammals on Earth are humans and livestock, and only 4% wild animals. Similarly, we've now seen the Bank of England again call for policymakers and the finance sector to start bridging the data gaps to help us address these issues. We've got the insurance industry looking at how can they refactor how they look at long-term climate model predictors. They've got a lack of existing tools, and every single person we've spoken to over the last year has pointed towards a lack of data. So it's a lack of data and a lack of tools. And without access to usable data, none of the technologies that are being talked about here at CogX are going to be any use. Whether it's AI or machine learning or deep learning, we can't start predicting what's going to happen in the future unless we get the right information in, garbage in, garbage out. And we need to get the insights to really map out these two existential threats, both climate change and species loss. So we're seeing a use it or lose it moment right now we need to start investing trillions of dollars in innovation to help drive down our emissions, in refactoring how we produce in the first place, excuse me, and getting it wrong has some pretty dire consequences. There are no jobs on a dead planet. We have got financial instruments in play, things like green bonds. When I speak to the people inside that sector, they say, well, a lot of that money is just rebadged existing spend to sustainability that isn't actually going to create the systemic impact that we need to see in the world. This is at the hundreds of billions scale. It's going to hit the trillions scale in the near future. But again, we don't have the right data backing up these investment decisions. So we have the capital ready, abundant even, but our ability to deploy it intelligently is missing. There are 6 areas of work that we're looking at within the Icebreaker program, looking at governance, we're looking at storytelling, what are the actual impacts of this, how can we refactor, for example, within the insurance industry, can we get people to pre-invest in making things more resilient and robust rather than paying for them after they're broken. We've got people building new business models and new tools. We've got people working on standards and underpinning all of this, looking at how we bring together our data infrastructure to support all of this activity. So on one level, it's a data sharing project, but really it's a culture change project. We need to get far greater sharing of the tools, expertise, underlying data, and standards to help us really start to address trillions of investment being directed into the right things rather than the wrong things. So just as a call to action, and then I'll break into a conversation with Bryony. Our call to action for today is to have a look at the website, get in touch with us if you're interested in participating, join some of our working groups and share this particularly with the financial sector, with the risk modelling sector and with the policy experts. So on that note, I'm going to pause and go into a more detailed conversation with Bryony. I did say I was going to go through that very quickly. But really what we're trying to build here is a web of data for everyone and everything. So how do we get the environmental data that we need so that we can leave no ecosystem behind? So on that note, Bryony.
Yes, Gavin.
Hello. So Bryony, as instigator of the UK Climate Change Act and executive director of the Environmental Defence Fund in Europe, you've been looking at mitigation. How do we stop the emissions in the first place?
Yeah, so I should just explain that Gavin has roped me into many things over the years, and I'm delighted to be back here with him today in this geodesic dome. And really what I'm interested in exploring is how can we use big data and this current huge expansion of capability to really push the needle on the mitigation part of climate change. That's the thing I've been spending most of my career focused on, and it's quite evident that we've not done enough, and we need to really need to hugely accelerate the pace at which we're moving on the solutions. And it feels to me that we're at this point in time, we have now some potential tools coming to help us just at the right time. But as Gavin said, if we don't think now about how we're going to make the data available in an open way and break down silos, I can foresee a world in which we have fantastic tools, but they're all being kept behind IP restrictions or held in private companies just at the time when we need to be spreading best practice really quickly throughout the planet. So that's the thing that I'm interested in. And I think when it comes to the sort of mitigation or the solving climate change before you have to adapt to it, there are a number of ways in which big data can help. Firstly, we need big data to be providing us with a real-time dashboard of what the heck's happening. If you spend some time with data scientists, and I know, Gavin, you've been doing this, you'll find that actually it's all a little bit higgledy-piggledy, bottom-up patchwork of data. There are buoys out there, there are satellites, there are tall tower networks, there are lots of data points, but these are often, they come about through bottom-up scientific endeavour. There's no overarching global plan of we need to measure this to make sure that this trend isn't going in the reverse or in the wrong direction. So there's a real need for an audit of everything we're doing in terms of gathering data so we can even start to understand what's happening and then manage the problem.
If I can come in there as well, if you talk to the World Meteorological Organization, they estimate that we're underreporting the emissions from North America by a factor of 5. That's 500%. So in terms of the way that we're actually looking at the impact of industry on our climate today, we're out by quite a long way. But also when you look at this as an economic opportunity, if we were to price carbon properly and those organisations had to pay, we'd suddenly see a switch in investment because it would be cheaper to deploy renewable energy, for example, and net zero carbon technologies than our current state of play. So that's part of the imperative here, is to get the right information in front of the right people to change the market behaviour.
And another good example of that is Environmental Defense Fund in the US has just been out checking self-reported data for methane emissions from fertilizer applications, and we found that their self-reported data is out by 100 times higher than what's self-reported. So if you think we've got a good handle on what's actually happening, how many greenhouse gases are, where they're coming from, we don't. But we can imagine a system. It's just that we need to find the policy-making tools with which we can make that happen and ensure that we're not just allowing this to be a bottom-up process, but there's some oversight from the top down. And then when it comes to the solutions, it's a similar issue in that, for example, when it comes to reducing the carbon intensity of our power systems, so how we generate electricity, that we know that there are emerging technologies that work, but there's very little in the way of accurate data that tells you where all this stuff is, how much it's generating at the time, and how, importantly, projecting forward an accurate picture of how much of it we can expect to see in the future. The ability for data, big data and AI and machine learning to contribute in that field is enormous. And one example is in solar. Information about the sun's rays hitting the planet hasn't had a commercial value until very recently. So there's very little in the way of data standards on predicting solar output from solar generation. That has to change, but it could change in a very privatized, closed-off way, in which case the companies who invest in it will benefit, or it could be done in a much more open and licensed way so that the whole world benefits from that knowledge about how solar can contribute to the problem and bring about lots of clean electricity.
And part of this as well, when we combine the climate issue with the biodiversity and species loss issues, we have to start looking more at the systemic impact of our investments. So, for example, in one country, they're looking at large-scale deployment of hydroelectric power, which is obviously much lower carbon energy generation, but to do so, they'd have to destroy a wild game reserve. So we'd actually accelerate species loss at the same time. So we need to start bringing together these systems models into our predictive tools to say what is really going to be the output of this investment in infrastructure, if we're going to build a new power grid in a country or replace one. We also need to look at it from an insurance perspective. A lot of the insurance companies I've spoken with have said they need to change their business model to, instead of paying for things when they're broken, to making sure they don't break in the first place. And that means a quite radical shift in the way that sector can work. And the scale of investment here, we've spoken to organisations that represent about 40 trillion worth of assets, is they're prepared to invest up to 10% of their portfolio worth in mitigating. And this is very linked with the kind of scale of investment that we're seeing. We've heard the Chancellor here say that it would cost $1 trillion to take the UK to carbon net zero. Actually, we need to go carbon net zero and then carbon net negative in most of the developed world. But bringing together these systems models simply isn't happening at any form of scale right now. So we really need developers, modelers, data scientists, policymakers, business people to come together to solve this. And one of the issues that we're looking at in trying to help with the data sharing piece was the Chief Executive of the Open Data Institute, where we help countries open up their data. But I also chaired the development of the Open Banking Standard, which has helped the industry in the UK, the banks, share personal data within a regulated environment. So here we've got models that we can apply to this problem today. They are working in the market right now to help us share data, license it where required, make it open where it's available, to help address these problems.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned there about the negative emissions. So if we assume the economists are right and pricing carbon is going to be the way that we tackle this, or putting a cap on emissions, or putting in some kind of financial incentive, quite quickly we're going to see money flowing into negative emissions, because the time we had to really get to zero emissions is gone. And we're now looking at certainly countries like the UK, which has one of the highest historical debts in terms of the emissions we've put up over the centuries. We're going to have to draw that down and find ways of taking this out of the atmosphere and storing it again. There is no even agreed taxonomy of how you do this. It's the very early stages. If we're going to pour money into that, we're going to need to know that that's a reliable and robust solution. So there's a whole suite of data tools that are going to be needed to monitor that. You've got to measure this so that people can invest in it. And we're just at the foothills. The UK is actually leading on some of this because we've got research projects already underway, but we haven't yet joined the dots to how we commercialise it and how we see money flow into these solutions in a robust way and an investable way.
And again, one of the ways that the insurance industry largely works today is they look backwards to predict the future. So they adjust on an annual basis as to, well, what happened last year, and let's reset our premiums based on that. If you look at some of the future models, and by future I mean in our lifetime, those become completely impractical and unfit for purpose. One of the most extreme examples I've come across is if we had 3 or 4 Hurricane Michaels back to back, then we would bankrupt the entire global insurance industry overnight. And so here, part of the narrative to take away is that the insurance industry is approaching a subprime moment which could facilitate or again, propagate into a global financial collapse, given the scale of events that are likely to happen over the next 10, 20, 30 years. So here, there's an absence of data in many places. There is poor data in other places, and the thinking is not joined up between the policy, the science, and the underlying evidence base in a way that's materially credible. So we need to start really looking at how do we share things with greater provenance so that industry and governments and certain countries can't just wheedle out and say, well, this isn't a problem.
So we haven't had the conversation I thought we were going to have, but it's good. It's very good. I was going to ask, do you think, Gavin, the thing that keeps me awake at night is, okay, we're at a moment in time in history where nationalism is on the rise and there's a sort of rejection of multilateralism. So the very time when we need to be pulling together, creating these global standards, pooling sovereignty so that we can come up with a global plan, we've actually done the opposite, signed an agreement which has got virtually no teeth and is entirely voluntary, called the Paris Agreement. So one thing I'm kind of interested in is, are there ways in which we can learn from how the internet has self-governed, has developed tools for itself to enable this to happen, almost despite governments, not because of governments? Are there themes, trends in that space that we can copy across? Because we haven't got time, I think. We will see the pendulum swing. I think multilateralism will come back. But right now, we need to be acting globally, but we have got almost no capacity to do that.
So again, the internet and the web in general, and the amount of innovation that we see at this event really highlights how quickly we can develop and deploy solutions at a global scale when we collaborate across the web and kind of ignore the politics and ignore the existing company infrastructures. So in terms of calls to action, there's a huge opportunity for people to reinvent insurance. There's a huge opportunity for people to reinvent investment. And how would we do that in a federated, multinational way that enabled billions of people to engage in those markets? So if we were going to, for example, deploy large-scale solar across a country where maybe only a third of the country has electricity, how would we crowdfund that? How would we bring together the different parts of the investment community to really make that work? There are lots of test projects out there. Some of them are getting some traction, but we don't need to deploy all of the kind of cutting-edge technology to get here. We need to get the right pieces of information in the right hands and then join up the financial models, the policy infrastructure, and the investment community so that they can see that they're going to make a return out of this. And I think the way to bypass the political cadence, if you like, which can take years, or the UN cadence, which can take even longer, is to use commerce to our advantage here. We need to find better ways of people making money. Much as that is a cynical view, we need to have much better ways of people making money out of the solutions. So part of that will be, as Bryony has highlighted, evidencing the scale of the problem and how far away we are from reality on our measurement and monitoring, and also evidencing the power of the solutions and the fact that there will be vastly greater returns on those than our existing infrastructure. And one anecdote in that, when we talk about investment, quite often people talk about stranded assets. So a stranded asset may be a coal-fired power station, which, given the pace of change, becomes a non-credible investment to make. The real stranded assets that we're looking at now are cities. Most of our major cities are next to the sea or next to large bodies of water. Sea level rise will make those untenable to stay. So if we really want to think about the potential liabilities here, in New York, they're investing $10 billion on flood defences to try and protect the city. Most estimates I've seen are that's probably out by a factor of 10. So we need to solve the problems at source in order to avoid these kind of issues.
So I think what we're saying is we need a bit of a global plan here, and there's such a massive set of challenges on climate change that almost everyone in this room could probably apply their knowledge to this in some way, shape or form. Gavin's an amazing convener of brilliant people. Icebreaker is one of his latest examples of that, where it's a constellation of talent, really. We all do it because we like Gavin, mainly. So it's a very open, very consultative process. And really what it's trying to do is build off the back of the established networks we have. We have a global communications platform in the internet, and we have capitalism. What can we do with that to make sure we solve this problem as quickly and efficiently as possible? And Icebreaker is trying to have that conversation. So please join us.
Thank you. And join us, individuals, or bring your companies. We've got Climate Kick as one of our investors. We've got Arup as a partner, and UN Environment as a partner as well, and about a dozen other companies as well. So call to action is please get in touch. Come and talk to us afterwards. It's the beginning of our next chapter of this development. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Happy to stay for